বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা।
Hello everyone, welcome to the Hindu analysis for 1st July 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. Drones flying toys banned in Jammu and Kashmir district after attacks. So recently there was an attack on an Air Force station in Jammu. We know that how significant it has been in terms of Government of India waking up to new threats or new vectors of attack on strategic installation and security forces. It seems that Rajouri district administration, which the Air Force station falls under, has decided to ban the sale or possession of drones or flying objects when the security agencies noticed at least 5 such incidents around security installations in Jammu since the Sunday attack. Now, there are two fields of thought that surround this decision from the district administration as to, is this the right way to approach the problem where you ban the entire thing when somebody used it for nefarious reasons? The second thing that people are questioning right now, as far as the person whom I am speaking to, is this district administration has enough resources to enforce this decision that they had taken? What if somebody flies it out of the bounds of the district borders or something like that? So the issue is, the one thing that we have to understand from this decision from the district administration is, the intention may be good, the reason may be a solid reason that they have taken this decision, but the question boils down to, will they be able to implement it in an effective manner so that these incidents do not repeat again? So that seems to be the issue. In regards to the developments, in regards to the development of a policy to thwart such attacks in the future, it seems that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet had a meeting in terms of understanding what should be the policy and how should it be framed, and how what would be the best way to equip the security agencies and security forces so that these incidents do not repeat and assets are not at stake. So that is the current issue and current development in terms of use of drones by terrorists to take out strategic targets. So moving on to the next article, SC pulls up government on ex gratia. So this is where I am conflicted to a little extent, right? We discussed how the government of India clearly indicated that it would be prudent, or it would be a colossal loss or burden on the treasury of the government and both the central and the states if we start talking about paying ex gratia to people who died because of COVID-19, and how the government of India sees this problem from the perspective of this is not an natural disaster, this is once in a lifetime disaster, and this is repetitive, right? The idea that the explanation that the central government gave during the hearing, earlier stages of the hearing, was that natural disasters are one and done, but COVID-19 is not one and done, because we had multiple waves and there is a greater chance that we are going to have future waves also. So I have been hearing both sides of the conversation, both sides of the argument as to, is this a good idea to begin with, or this is a bad idea to begin with? My understanding as of right now is the government is giving free treatment to COVID-19, is giving free medicines to COVID-19. It is trying to augment resources both in terms of tackling and preventing COVID-19. And from a standpoint of view, yes, you have to give it to the precedence that it is a huge loss of human life, and the emotional impact that it is going to have on families who have lost their loved ones is not going to be either solved or condoled or anything. Nobody can do anything to fill that void or gap in the families in their families. But that is where it becomes a little bit of an problematic argument to take, or a stand to take, when human emotions are involved to such an extent. But as far as the Supreme Court again pulled up the National Disaster Management Authority, which is headed by the Prime Minister of India, for failing to do its duty to recommend ex gratia to the families of those who lost their loved ones due to COVID-19. So uh, that's the issue with the ex gratia surrounding this COVID-19 pandemic. It is when you look at it from the perspective, um, Indian economy is in no position to pay ex gratia to the families of the COVID-19 victims. That is the sensitive issue that has to be discussed around, because human lives have been lost in greater numbers, and we have to see how this case progresses, or how this entire discussion progresses, because of the sensitivity surrounding it. Moving on to the next article, it is up to NDMA to fix ex gratia amount. In a related article, as in the same discussion in the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court left it to the wisdom of National Disaster Management Authority to fix the amount of ex gratia to the families of those who lost their loved ones to COVID-19. Now, earlier in the article, we discussed how the Supreme Court bench, which was headed by Mr. Ashok Bhushan, who was retiring yesterday, whose last day it was yesterday, finally, before retiring, issued a judgment stating that you have to pay ex gratia to people who died due to COVID-19. And we discussed how sensitive the matter is, and how impractical at a point of view economically that uh, paying ex gratia to the in this condition is. Now, the court is also unimpressed by the government's argument that the COVID-19 was a continuous disaster whose trajectory cannot be predicted. That is what we discussed, where the Solicitor General of India, Tushar Mehta, has said that this is not a one-time disaster, and this is a repeating disaster, and one-time monetary compensation to victims would not help now. Now, the idea was that, or the argument that the central government was basing on the fact that we need that money to channel into public health, vaccination, treatment, food, economy, and etc. and so forth. And we already know how stressed the state finances are. Forget about the central finances. Remember, the state finances are so thin and stretched right now. Even certain states in South India had started beginning to borrow huge sums of money just to meet their day-to-day government needs. So that is the issue surrounding this. We have to wait what the Supreme Court agrees, or what the state governments or the central governments do weigh in this regard. Until unless we have to be patient in understanding that we cannot give our opinion in this. It's as simple as that. So moving on to the next article, an attempt to silence the film fraternity. This is in regards to the recent draft proposing amendments to the cinematography bill that the government of India intends to amend. Now, this article is important in regards that a person who himself is in film industry and is associated politically, presenting his views. Now, his argument is that the proposed amendments to the cinematography law will prevent film lawmakers from making certain kinds of films, which is valid when you read the text of the draft proposal. Now, the recent action of the central government is one such. I am referring to the draft. The author of this editorial says, I am referring to the draft cinematography amendment bill of 2021, for which the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has asked for opinions before presenting it to the Parliament. So it is not set in stone yet, or the proposed amendments are not set in stone yet. There is a lot of discussion to go right now, and the government is currently accepting their individual opinions, citizen opinions, or civil society opinion before presenting it to the Parliament in the form of a draft bill. Now, what is this a problem with the draft bill is? Now, the main contention or bone of contention with the draft proposed or the amendment proposed in the cinematography bill is it wishes to add a provision, or it adds a provision, not even wish, it adds a provision to the subsection 1 of the section 6 of the Cinematography Act, which grants revisionary powers to the central government to direct re-examination of films that have already been certified for public exhibition. Now, what is the current scenario? The current scenario is that once a film gets certified by the Central Board of Film Certification, the film cannot be recertified nor it cannot be called back. Once the film receives a certification, it is up to the hands of the producer or the director or the makers of the film to make necessary changes or corrections according to their own will and wish. So, once a film is certified by the Central Board of Film Certification and it goes out for the distribution, the Central Board of Film Certification cannot recall it or rechange the certificate that they have given. Now, everybody agrees, including the industry agrees, that the current censorship rules are archaic and redundant, and we have been, the author says here, that we have been trying ourselves horace to abolish the same, inviting artists to be their own creators. So what the author of this article says that instead of trying to curtail the freedom of information or freedom of decision making or thought in this regards, the creators of such endeavors must be given more freedom, more autonomy, and they must be allowed to showcase their creations without any hindrances. Now, what the amendment that adding of the proviso to the subsection 1 of the section 6 is to give amendment powers or revisionary powers to any government after certification, and it is a step backwards rather than a step forward in freedom of expression or freedom of thought through medium of film. Now, what was the earlier relief that these filmmakers had when they had to challenge a decision taken by the CBFC? Earlier, they had to go in front and present their case in front of the Film Certification Appellate Tribunal, which the current government had abolished. In the sense that earlier, what used to happen, if you are a filmmaker and you have an issue with the Board of Certification, you used to take that case and appear in front of the Film Certification Appellate Tribunal stating that these are our objections to the board's decision. We need them to be reconsidered. So there was a redressal mechanism that filmmakers and directors had in their tool set. Now the government had decided to abolish the Film Certification Appellate Tribunal, making any filmmaker who wants to question or challenge the board's decision must approach the local high court. The argument that the author of this editorial makes that it would be too expensive and too time consuming for most filmmakers, and you have to look at from the perspective of the burden on the high court system also. It is already overburdened. You know the number of pending cases in the high courts of India, and add on to top of to that, you are adding this this kind of litigations into the mix, which will further complicate things, which is bound to further complicate things for the filmmakers. Now look at the portions of the section 6 part 1 of the principal article. This particular section was held to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of India in Union of India versus K.M. Shankarappa case in the year 2000. The observations made during that trial by the court was that Section 6.1 is a travesty of rule of law, which is one of the basic structures of the Constitution of India. With this, the government of India, with this amendment, the government of India is trying to circumnavigate the decision or the observation of the Supreme Court in the year 2000. They are invoking the principle that not every right and the fundamental right is not absolute, right? They are saying that not every right is absolute, and they are trying to connect it with 19 of Indian Constitution. Now with this, the government is empowered to act against complaints received by submitting itself to the judicial review against the decision of the CBFC granting certification, and instead of trying to impose excessive executive access, which the Supreme Court laid in their judgment, which became the principal argument for the Supreme Court decision through its order in the 2000. The central government, as I said earlier, is circumnavigating the entire observation made by the central Supreme Court. And since the tribunal has been struck down recently by the government of India, filmmakers have no other way out of getting the grievances solved. Now the The argument conclusively put forth by the author of this article, who happens to be a prominent film star, who happens to be a prominent politician in Tamil Nadu, where he himself has experienced such aggressive actions by the state government, where few of his films were put to the test by the state government through coercion, through legal action, through police action, and whatnot. We have to understand there is a certain valid sense of responsibility in his argument, stating that the draft bill will only restrict freedom of speech and put a gag on the film fraternity, preventing filmmakers from making films on bad governance, social evils, and so on and so forth. Now we have to look at it from the perspective of both the filmmaker and the government, where certain films in the recent time had resulted in a lot of controversy because of the nature of the films themselves. Either it may be films through OTT platforms or films that were released in theaters. Right, when religious sentiments were being hurt, or sensitivities were being trampled upon by certain filmmakers through certain OTT platforms or movies, we saw the pushback that they were getting, and the government of India was trying to play catch up with those OTT platforms. Now, any further executive authority may be now emboldened to ban films based on frivolous petitions of groups with vested interests or fringe groups. So, that argument that the author makes is valid in a sense that yes, the government of India or the amendment bill is trying to make a U-turn around the judgment given by the Supreme Court of India in 2000, and there are certain concerns surrounding the amendment bill, given that there is no proper redressal mechanism put in place to address these issues that may arise out of this scenario in future. So that is the current situation with regards to the cinematography amendment bill. Moving on to the next article, re-examining examinations. This is in regards to the current online pattern of examination and the problems that are associated with our examination models that we have been introduced, or we have been putting in place to gauge the knowledge of students at various levels of education system in India. Now, with the pandemic, many of the universities and many of the examinations are either to move to an online platform or an online platform pattern of examination, or cancel altogether. Now, the idea the author of this article put forward is that the online pattern of examination should not only judge intellectual development of a student as it is prevalent in the present day examination system, but it must also test the holistic development of the students. So one of the problems that current examination system has in India is they don't test the entire range or spectrum of a student's ability. They look at only one thing: can he reproduce an answer on an answer sheet? In the current mode of examinations, the only intellect paradigm or the intellect component of a student is measured. So that means that students, nor the parents, nor the education system is not incentivized to ensure overall growth of an individual or a student. So they tend to concentrate more on the intelligent component of the student, meaning they are forced or either they are trained to rote learn and reproduce the same in answers, which does not bode well for the individual, nor the entire educational system, nor the country India. So now we have a golden opportunity to rejig and rework our entire approach to examinations in India. Now it is the responsibility of every academician and authority to find ways and means to conduct online examination with reliable standards amid COVID-19 pandemic. That is absolutely true. It's the responsibility of organizations and the authorities to come up with the proper ways so that students do not get cheated out of what is rightfully theirs. Now the problem with this current scenario is now to conduct examinations successfully during this period, you need strategies, particularly in regards to online examination. And what should be the strategy, or what should be the structure of these examinations? Now, calling for cancellation of examinations is a problem when the entire educational system is based upon the marks that you are awarded when you write your final year exams or final semester exams. and trying to come up with stopgap arrangements just because we are in a pandemic is not the way forward. You have to come out with a concrete solution that not only addresses the structural issues in our examination patterns but ensures a foundation for future examination patterns also. Now, the Supreme Court had clearly stated last year that the students in higher education cannot be promoted without writing the final year or terminal semester examinations. And when a directive to the University Grant Commission, which was given by them, said that states cannot promote students based on internal assessment or past performances. This was their own directive stating that you cannot promote students based on past internal assessments or past performance. Even the court observed to that extent, stating that states can only postpone final year or final semester exams based under the Disaster Management Act of 2005, but they do not or they did not have the power to direct universities to promote students based on their prior performance. And as students' assessment was the prerogative of the University Grants Commission. Now, what should be the solution to this current problem? Now, when you are talking about assessing a student, the assessment of educational objectives of understanding, critical and independent thinking, problem solving ability, reflective thinking, skill development, and application of knowledge must be tested. It's not about only the intelligent aspect of it. It must include assessment of the educational objectives of understanding what is the understanding level or understanding capability of the individual. What is their critical and independent thinking positions? Are they able to solve problems? What is their ability in problem solving? Can they think reflectively? Can they think in a dynamic way, not in a static way? What about their skill development? Can they translate these skills into something else that they can and should be doing? Are these skills not transferable? And application of knowledge, are they applying the knowledge that they are studying in their classrooms? Look at how many of us are using the last subject that we had learned when we were in school, except mathematics. To be pretty honest with you, nothing has been pretty much useful to me since my schooling days. So that is the issue that we have to address. Until and unless, as I said, the core issues of the examination pattern or the education pattern system are addressed, this evaluation of exams or evaluation of students' marks is going to be a problem. Now, what should be the alternative approach? The alternative approach to this current problem is to conduct open book examination, as it allows students to refer textbooks or other source materials while answering questions, because they are given questions prior to the examination, and this allows students to come up with innovative ways and answers to solve their problems. Now, the other problem that we are currently facing because of this online mode of examination is copying. People are copying, students are copying left, right, and center. I have my family members who are copying on online examinations despite the college trying to prevent such practices. But kids are going to be kids, students are going to be students. Who is going to stop them? Now, there are certain universities in India who are currently conducting a tight-knit exam, ensuring that copying does not take place. Now, the solution is not to entirely restrict the examination pattern. Now, they have to restrict copying, and they have to analyze the answer scripts using plagiarism softwares that prevents or detects plagiarism from students' answer. We have to use technologies, we have to monitor and supervise students during online examinations, and that is not a pretty much difficult task because universities are doing it. All you have to do is scale it up to a greater extent that it can be applied all over India. And you have to also remember that it is also a little bit of a resource intensive situation. Not all schools and colleges have that kind of a technology with them. Now, to conclude this argument, you have this problem with your examination pattern, you have this problem with evaluation, you have this problem with what is the end goal of an examination. The answer should lie anywhere in between. When you are testing the knowledge gained by a student, during his or her schooling or his or her college days. Now, presentation of that knowledge gain is the essence of education. So, without that end exam, without that final exam where they get to express or present all of their learnings into an answer script or any other medium, without that it becomes impossible to gauge the level of learning of a student. So that is what the argument of this article, author of this article, makes, which is interesting. Moving on to the next article. This article is in regards to the central government decision to create an agri stack, right? The government of India stated that they are in agreement with Microsoft company, and they have selected 100 villages in India to carry out a project called Agri Stack, where they are trying to digitize farming. Now, the Central recently published a paper on India Digital Ecosystem of Agriculture idea on June 1st and had sought public feedback by the end of this month. Now, there has been a lot of pushback in this regard because the entire project hinges upon collection of data from farmers and creating a database of farm, their land, and their crop patterns, and so on and so forth. The issue seems to be, or the pushback seems to be, that the data collection aspect does not have enough safeguards to protect the farmers' data or their or the data sets that are being collected. Because once the data is collected, the data can be exploited by organizations and institutions to get their upper hand over farmers. So that is a valid argument. You have to protect the data, because that digital article or the paper that the government of India published does not speak in length about how data is going to be protected, and whether the consent of the farmer is going to be taken before the data is being used or given out to somebody. Now, there is also this argument regards what is the situation of the people if they don't have land. Generally, most of the farmers in India do not have land. They do it on a lease basis. They are landless cultivators. So this program or this initiative does not cover those people, because it tries to link a farmer with his land and provide him with a farmer ID that is in the hands of the central government on a database, on a cloud database. So that is the concern here, and that is what the Agri Stack is, and that is how government of India is trying to digitize farmers' ecosystem and economy. Now, moving on to the next article, big tech firms should be accountable. Now, this statement from External Affairs Minister Jaishankar during an interaction with former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair in a meeting called India Global Forum 2021. Now, when certain questions were asked regarding recent spats with tech companies, particularly WhatsApp, Facebook, and Twitter at the core of the issue, Mr. Jaishankar observed that right now a big debate on big tech is going on in different parts of the world, including a vigorous one in India. Right? He also does not deny the fact that they are forces of progress that are helping nations take steps towards opening up new venues for development and growth. But in a democratic society, we have to ask ourselves, big tech is there in my life, but where is the responsibility of the big tech? Because they tend to have huge power in your decision making process, because of the access that they have to your life, your information, that even the government of India or any government in the world does not possess to. So that in place that gives them a lot of power as to what you think and have a lot of say in your how you behave also. Now, as well as the question as to, according to him, should we hold big tech companies accountable? Now, the problem comes in terms of the governance issue and the democratic issue. There are two groups of thinking where you have to let these companies grow, and there is the other argument that you have to rein in these companies because they are infringing on your laws and your sovereignty. Now, the problem comes with when the player itself, when the private player becomes too big and they are non-state actors who are trying to act as state actors. right? When you look at the language that Twitter has been using with the government of India, they are saying that we strive to uphold freedom of speech. We try to uphold our own laws. Remember, they are not a country. They are a private for-profit company. India is a country. India is a democratically thriving country. We have a democratically elected government. We frame our own laws. We have judiciary. We have executive. We have legislative. We have checks and balances. If it is anybody that is going to try or uphold the freedom of speech of an individual, it should be the government of India. It should be the judiciary of India. It should be the legislative of India, not a private Twitter company. So that language, that use of that language poses the problem. I'm not against a Twitter company or any other company. Any company can operate freely in India. It is a democratic country. It is open for business. The problem comes when these companies tend to use languages like we strive to uphold the law of freedom of speech. We try to comply with the law. You shouldn't try. You should comply. See, we didn't ask them to give data of users. We were asking them, there are certain issues with your policies or your application of policies where you have certain biases that you are showing to displays. We have that problem. We need somebody we can talk to, because now it's a faceless corporation. When the government of India asked the CEO or the head of Twitter to present himself before the House panel committee, they refused. So that is the problem. Their actions and their compliance with Indian law is the problem. Their presence in India is not the problem. Their actions and their compliance with Indian law is the problem. Now, as the External Affairs Minister rightly points out, this issue is not limited to India. Look at how they are trying to append the European Union Commission, where they are trying to bend front, backward, center, left, everywhere to mislead European Union Commission on digital rights, saying that we didn't do that, we did that, and finally what happened? The European Union decided that we are going to fine billions of dollars because you violated our rights. The difference when you compare with India and other countries is we lack data protection laws. That is where these social media companies have the upper hand. Until and unless you frame legal laws or you have a legal framework under which, if these companies fail to comply, you can legally initiate proceedings, this problem is going to be persisting in India. So statements coming from the External Affairs Minister do play a significant role in understanding what is the stand of Indian government in regards or posturing to showcase to the world. Because when he says that, it means that this is what we are saying to other countries in the world. So we are making our stand clear that we will not allow other companies, private companies particularly, to manipulate or control national laws or not adhere to laws of the land. So moving on to the next article, India flags Green Pass issue. Again, one more issue where we are having regulatory problems with other countries, right? Now, the European Union is planning to issue a Green Pass from July 1st. Now, when Covishield, which is AstraZeneca's vaccine, which is being manufactured by Serum Institute of India, has approached the European Union to add their vaccine into the Green Pass list, the European Union denied, stating various reasons. Now, this issue is the latest of the issues that India has been expecting or facing in terms of our vaccines getting approval in international forum. You know, on one side, the United States Health Administration is saying that Covaxin is the best vaccine that is available because it is effective against 698 variants, and it has proven to be effective against the Delta variant. On the other hand, you have the FDA of the administration stating that we are not giving emergency use authorization to Covaxin. On the other hand, you have AstraZeneca, which is has failed to get a Green Pass agreement from the European Union, despite the vaccine being the same that they are using in UK and European Union, because it's nothing but the formula. We got the formula from the AstraZeneca makers and the Oxford makers, and we are just using that formula, the same process, and we are manufacturing the vaccine in India. Now, as far as what is the problem here, the problem seems to be that they have dual standards. This problem is not only limited to India, this problem is also extended to other African countries. Now, we are asking for exemption because we want to export our vaccines to those countries, right? The problem here in this particular Green Pass issue is they are trying to give a pass to a person who is traveling from one country to the other country, and they have this list of vaccines that if that person is administered with any of those vaccines in the list, he or she may enter the country or leave the country. But without that Covishield vaccine, Indian citizens who want to travel to that country cannot be admitted into the country because their vaccine is not in the green list, which prevents a lot of Indians who have either educational needs or travel needs to go to European countries are excluded from this list and they cannot travel to that country. But on the other hand, those people, those Europeans who received their respective vaccines can come into India without any restrictions because we haven't put any such restrictions on citizens. All we are asking right now is, have you been vaccinated? If you are not vaccinated, can you please be tested? And please stay in quarantine for 7 or 14 days. So the discrepancy seems to be that of certain nature, which is a cause of concern for both the vaccine manufacturers and the government because the policy is skewed towards India. Skewed against India. So as far as both the Covishield and Covaxin, we haven't got the emergency approval from the European Union. So this issue is still active. We have to wait and see what the government of India is going to do because the certification or the COVID certification that they are talking about doesn't support Indian stand or the Indian citizenry who want to go to European countries for various reasons. It may be medical, it may be educational, it may be business, whatever it may be. Even it may be tourism. See, one of the potential issues that they were talking about was without vaccination, we are not going to allow you into our country. When we are getting vaccinated with the same vaccines that they are using and they are setting a double standard for their own vaccine just because it is being manufactured in India and not in their country, this is something that has to be looked seriously. So moving on to the next article, Cabinet clears viability gap funds for BharatNet. So the Union Cabinet on Wednesday finally approved a viability gap funding support of up to 19,000 crore for the implementation of BharatNet project through public-private partnership in 16 states. Now the project that is getting the extension is to extend to all inhabited villages beyond the Gram Panchayats in 16 states that include Kerala, Karnataka, to Arunachal Pradesh. This is according to our telecom minister. Now this is an in-principle agreement. The aim is to improve or implement BharatNet in all of these 16 states. The total cost of the project is going to be 29,000 crores and the government is willing to spend 19,000 crores of that entire project. Now it is estimated that under this project close to 3.6 lakh villages will be covered under the BharatNet initiative. And the idea is that the government of central government is going to bear the most of the cost and the rest of the cost must be matched up by the central state governments either through a private firm or their own industries. Now this is a welcome step when we are talking about the never ending digital divide in India and the exaggerated digital divide that we are seeing in rural parts and urban parts of India because of COVID-19. So that is how BharatNet is important to India. The BharatNet is one of the steps that central government and state governments can enhance to reduce the digital divide that we are seeing in India right now. Moving on to the next article, May's lower spending pegs fiscal deficit at 8.2. Now, Indian fiscal deficit in the first 2 months of 21-22 stood at 8.2% of the budget target, with revenue receipts rising even as spending contracted by the end of the May. This is according to the data that was released by the Controller General of Accounts on Wednesday. Now, we know that the spending has contracted by 47% in May. Now, we saw a sharp increase in spending in the month of April, but immediately it got reversed because the contraction was at 41% in the month of May. Now, this was during the highest numbers that we were seeing during the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic, which had hurt the economy even more. But there were some gaps in terms of implementing lockdowns and allowing manufacturers to manufacture and operate. But nonetheless, the economy took a big hit in the second wave of COVID-19, and it means that we have to be cautious in terms of interpreting the outcomes of both April and May. We cannot take those numbers on their face value. We have to be very careful. Now, as far as the RBI is concerned, they are still optimistic that we are going to see an economic recovery. But earlier, as we said, the entire thing that we heard during the first wave or the first wave was that we are going to see a V-shaped recovery. But now we are saying that it is not going to be a V-shaped recovery, but we are going to see a W-shaped recovery. Now, it certainly did had an impact on year's fiscal deficit, and it looks like the government is not going to meet the targets that it had set in the terms of fiscal deficit in its budget because of various issues. And we have to also consider that whatever the revenue receipts that we are seeing right now do not actually meet the expectations of the government nor the economists. So that is the current issue in terms of economy in India right now. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা। বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি।